I'm a little bit reminded of Henry V's speech before the Battle of Agincourt, St Crispin's Day. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. So I won't go into the rest of it, but all of us that are left at the end of the day, I think you should be proud to be here. So, and also start with an endorsement as well then. In terms of the Association of Business Crime Partnerships, I'll come on a little bit to what they are and how they work. But we are already engaging with our members to encourage them to use the fraud reporting line, which we think is excellent. We're in negotiations with the National Business Crime Solutions because we think that holds a great deal of prospects. And we're also having meetings with FaceWatch. And I suppose I'll do a presentation about issues, and it's just nice to do a presentation when there are actually solutions emerging as well, which is unusual. Now, the other thing is, last in the day, everyone else has said most of the things in my slides, so it will be relatively quick, I think. And there's a button, even better. Things you already know. I suppose the only point I'd draw your attention to here, we often hear these discussions and it seems to be all about Tesco's and Sainsbury's and all these big retailers, but the bottom one is the interesting one. 450,000 shops, but owned by 300,000 enterprises. So there are the Tesco's, there are the Sainsbury's, and we previously heard from the National Federation. A lot of businesses are small businesses, and a lot of our members are small businesses. And I would make a distinction between the needs of relatively small business traders and the really big boys that play nationally. Again, we've seen these figures before, and the point here, in contrast to the next one, is that £5.4 billion, of course, is around about £100 for every one of us a year in terms of retail theft. But if you compare that to the projected cost of fraud at £73 billion, you know, that's £1,441 a year for every one of us, which we're paying directly and indirectly. So clearly, you know, all of the points that have been made before about these are significant issues. Rustlings of papers. We've only touched on this a little bit today, but the other big issue for our members is about violence. Where I previously worked in Kent, the largest victim of crime, and it's probably not breaching any confidence, which was 4% of all the crime that was committed in Kent, was the cooperative. And the reason for this, of course, is fairly clear, is the cooperative run lots of shops in fairly tough areas that are open extended hours. And the problem for the cooperative is that many of their staff are young and they live in the communities where the shops are based, and there are horrendous levels of intimidation of their staff. And we really discovered this because we had lots and lots of video clips being handed in of people walking into the shops, boulders, brass, and stealing things. And we were given the video clips, but we were told no one knew who they were. But of course the issue is everyone knows who they are, they're just not willing to say because they have no confidence in the criminal justice system. So the level of violence and intimidation that goes on within the retail sector, I think, is quite extraordinary. And then we've not really touched upon this so much. BDO accountants predict a rise of 12.5% in retail business failures. We've seen a lot of these emerging already. You're probably aware that police forces are facing this reduction in budget. I think police forces tend to, bring the old violin out and everything else, but what you've got to remember is policing saw a 30% increase in spending in the last 10 years, and they're seeing between a 20 and 30% reduction in spending in the next 4 years. Or they're halfway through it, in fact. So what's happening with policing is they're going back to the spending levels that they had roughly in 2002, 2003. And I don't remember the sky falling in on our heads in 2002, 2003. So treat what the police say with a little bit of caution. There's a difference between being unhappy with something and actually something being impossible. For those of you who haven't read it, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation from October 2010 really predates a lot of the stuff that Mary Porter's done. What Joseph Rowntree did was they looked at a lot of communities' estates, and they looked at the shops, and they looked at the role of the shops in these sorts of communities. And they observed the terrible spiral that you get in a community where you start to see a change in the demographics of the community. You then start to find that the shops get into difficulties, they have problems with antisocial behaviour, they have problems with theft, and eventually these little shopping estates are driven out of business. And of course that hastens the decline of the community, because if you don't have a car, where do you go shopping? If you want to live in a nice community, you like the facilities, so the social capital, the people with the get up and go, and that leaves these communities very deprived. And I mean, I live in Kent, not far from Margate, and if you want to see how bad this can get, 40% of the shops in Margate are unoccupied or charity shops. It's probably the saddest shopping centre you can go to, but it's the most wonderful piece of Victorian architecture. And we sometimes forget, certainly the police I think sometimes forget, just how critically important the retail sector is in building safe and confident communities where people feel able to go out and take part in the communities in which they live. Now, I even got a pointer for this one. Statistics. Lies, damned lies and statistics. Earlier, Mr. Banfield was talking about figures going back 30 or 40 years. You won't be able to see the numbers, but this is the last 20 years' crime, roughly from 1990 to 2010. And the rather shocking purpley line is the recorded crime figures. Now, I don't know that there's any value in the recorded crime figures. There's certainly no value in looking back over 30, 40 years. The only figure that we have any accurate record over is the murder rate. And interestingly, it's 100 times lower now than it was in the medieval period, probably something to do with not carrying swords. But most crime, it's very difficult to make any sensible comparison. There were horrendous levels of crime during the Second World War, but of course it was politically suppressed. There's a huge growth in crime in the 70s and 80s, but the best correlation you find between levels of crime and any other figure is policing numbers. The more police officers you have, the more crime you get. Not that they're committing it all, but it's about capacity. So the more police officers that you have, the more capacity, the more you record crime. But in the last 20 years, there's probably something of value to look at. And what you'll find is that there is a peak of recorded crime around about 1992, when it got up to about 600,000 crimes, and then it dipped down to 1996-ish, and then there was a steady rise up to another peak, which was 2003. And since 2003, in the recorded crime figures, we've seen 8 years of successive fall in reported crime. And, there are all sorts of arguments about that. This takes us to 2010, but now we're actually seeing crime beginning to rise again. You could argue it's because of the recession. We're losing police officers, so crime should continue to go down, according to my theory. If you look at the numbers of shoplifting crimes, they're absolutely steady. The numbers of crimes haven't varied very much over the last 20 years, which is frankly suspicious. But if you look at the percentage of crime which is shoplifting, as we get this little dip in overall crime, shoplifting becomes a higher percentage. The value stays the same, so it becomes a higher percentage. And you see the two lines cross here, so as crime has gone down consistently over the last 8 years, the percentage of all crime that relates to shoplifting, and it's only shoplifting, not violence, not fraud, not all those other things, has gone up. And on this chart, the percentage of all crime that is shoplifting is heading for 8%. In many forces, the percentage of crime that's shoplifting is now over 10%. In fact, in many forces, shoplifting is the single largest crime category overall. There is no type of offence which is more prevalent than shoplifting. And I think it doesn't take much to understand why that would be the case in terms of the sanctions. And if you consider just how little shoplifting is reported to the police, then you just have to imagine how much shoplifting is actually going on. Talking to my members, they will come up with legion incidents where it's very difficult to report things to the police. I even saw a letter that was written to one shop manager by the police saying, "You're reporting so much crime, if you carry on doing it, will consider that you're an unfit person to hold a liquor licence. You know, so I don't think we would ever write to a victim of burglary and say, you know, it's outrageous that you left the window open. If you keep doing that, we're going to prosecute you for something. So at the moment, there's lots of evidence of suppression of overall crime figures around retail crime, but it's still a very significant pattern of offending. So the challenges, we have theft, fraud, violence we've covered. We haven't really touched on antisocial behaviour, but my experience is there's a huge level of antisocial behaviour related to the retail sector. And somewhere in all there is what's it like to go shopping, which is a bit that's of most concern to us. People will not go out shopping if it feels unsafe, if it's filled with litter and rubbish and unpleasantness. Couple that then with the recession and the shrinking margins, and above all, the retreat of the public sector partnerships. And everything we've heard today is it's about self-help. It's what you can do for yourself and how you can help others. So that's the gloomy part of the introduction of it. And then I thought I'd talk a little bit about ABCP. What people haven't mentioned today very much, the focus has been around retailers during the daytime. And of course, our partnerships, which are really locally based partnerships around retail, we have the daytime and the nighttime economy. So within the same location, in lots of town centres, you'll have the retail spend in the daytime economy with a profile of people between 9 in the morning and 6 at night. And then from 7 in the night till midnight, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, you have another set of retail disposals with a completely different population profile, with largely a different set of retailers. And our interest is in both, and we promote safer shopping awards and assessments, but we also promote safer socialising. And I think it's a bit of a point that's been missed today, is that there's more than your Sainsbury's and your Tesco's. There is the retail trade. It was most touched upon in the FaceWatch presentation. So ours are very localised partnerships. Every part of where I live in Kent, every trading centre has a partnership. There's about 34 partnerships in Kent on every sort of shopping centre or town centre. There's over 100 partnerships nationally. Every partnership has to have a coordinator, has usually to have a radio scheme, so there's effective communications. It's assessed because all of the members have to be compliant with the Data Protection Act and the Human Rights Act in terms of the collection, processing and storage of data, which I think is a real vulnerability for a lot of schemes in terms of how they manage things. These standards are assessed. And I think one of the big benefits of being members concerns the non-judicial disposals. It's been touched on a little bit today, how frustrated people are with the criminal justice system. You've had something stolen, you try and report to the police, it takes a few hours for them to arrive, it's a few hours to take a statement, then you get warned for court and then you're not needed, and then you're warned for court and you're not needed. You know, the huge criminal justice process can be a waste of time. But within non-judicial disposals, we have some excellent remedies. So, for example, we have exclusion orders, which is if you're a persistent offender in the daytime or the nighttime economy, all of the members within a locality will bar you from their premises. So you're a nuisance in Whitstable, in Kent, on the north coast, in the pubs. The first thing is you get barred from a pub, so you're a nuisance somewhere else. Then all the pubs in Whitstable bar you. So you've now got to drive 5 miles to Herne Bay if you want to be a nuisance. But then they ban you in Herne Bay as well. So where are you going to go now? 30 miles to Maidstone? That is a far better sanction than a fine, a conditional discharge or something else. And it provides us with some very useful methods as well. So within our partnerships, where people are excluded, if a member sees someone who's excluded entering the shopping centre, then a member of security staff, a police officer, a PCSO will go and greet them. Say, hello, how nice to see you. You know you're barred. You know we're going to watch you. If you go into any shop, you'll be asked to leave, so you may as well clear off. So a lot of the stuff we've heard today is about how do you detect people who've committed offences. Our concern is about how do you prevent the commission of offences, and preventing offences, the sanctions around exclusions, are clearly more awkward for the offenders than being caught and dealt with afterwards. And the other sorts of non-judicial disposals that we talk about is we have lots of restorative justice schemes. Many people have made the point today that it's a victimless crime, and many offenders, especially young children, think it's a victimless crime. So we have programs of restorative justice where they go into shops where they have to undertake some kind of compensatory activity, but they also get to understand that a shopkeeper is a person with a living and people can be put out of work. Brighton has a very good scheme which has been running for a couple of years, and I don't think they've had a single reoffender yet. But you have to wait quite a long time to make sure you don't have any. And then you're probably all familiar with civil recovery. My own view is I would like to strongly argue that fixed penalty notices, which are dished out quite badly on occasions by the police, should be dished out by approved traders, and the money from the fixed penalty goes to the trader, not to the government as the money from fixed penalty notices go. It would seem to regularise it. So our argument is, for our members, either in the daytime or nighttime economy, what we're getting out of the membership of it is improved confidence. Those sole traders, those young members of staff who are on their own, those people threatened by people coming in, able to call up on the radio, call their neighbours, call other people to come and see them. Improved confidence, improved levels of skill, how to deal with things, improvements in loss prevention, and overall reductions in risk. Risk of assault and abuse and everything else. So I'm a great and passionate believer in them, both as a resident of Kent, but also in my role in supporting it. But there are very significant gaps. The Association of Business Crime Partnerships are very localised partnerships, which presents the set of problems. We really have very little capacity to deal with travelling criminals. And we do see them coming down to the regional shopping centres. Blue Water, for example, in Dartford, is a regional shopping centre, and people travel there from all over the country. There is an ABCB scheme in Blue Water, but it has gaps around this sort of level of offending and virtual crime, fraud and other virtual crimes. Whilst we in Kent and in other parts of the country where ABCP is strong have good local structures, it's weak. We're weak around regional national structures and cross-border cooperation. We're very supportive of the things that we've heard today, but I won't underestimate how difficult it is to get police forces to take this on. I did some work with the distribution company that distributes Scotch from the Scottish distillers, and it wasn't unusual for them to lose a trailer load of whiskey somewhere near the M1, and they couldn't find a single force that would record it as a crime. We had another distributor based in Kent who delivered tobacco and alcohol, cash and valuable in transit sort of stuff, to convenience stores, and they were losing £1 million of stock a year, where gangs were following their lorries, waiting for them to start unloading, and then just stealing alcohol and tobacco off the lorries, either with force or without. And they couldn't find a single force who would be interested in it, because it was £200,000 in the Met, 50,000 in Kent, 40,000 in Hertfordshire. But in the end, we managed to get an operation from the Metropolitan Police to do for them. So it's going to be really difficult to get forces. We did some research nationally, and we asked every force in England and Wales, all 43 of them, do you have any priorities around business crime? And the answer was no. So we went to all the regional centres and we said to them, do you have any priorities around business crime or travelling offenders connected with business crime? And the answer was no. And we said, do you have any target criminals who are travelling criminals who do this? And the answer to that was no. And there was a chap who was a plumber who was arrested last year, I think, who, while he was doing his plumbing, and he travelled the country doing his plumbing, was a professional shoplifter. And when he was arrested and a proper job was done on him and his house was searched and everything else, it was found that he had £1 million in assets, including several £100,000 in gold bars, because his problem was he couldn't put the money into the bank because of the drugs regulation. So he was buying gold bars as a way of investing his money into something. And he was just a plumber who had a sideline in high-level shoplifting. So what we need to do then what's really important is this evaluation and assessment. I'm in discussions with the local university to do evaluation over the coming year about our partnership schemes, to find out what works, what doesn't work, what we need to change. But the challenge is, for all of the other things that we've heard today, to have a proper evaluation. One of the great problems that we've had in the past is people have brilliant ideas, and it's all personality driven. You know, it's this major national retailer, they've got this brilliant idea, they're going to do it, and no one's going to say to their boss it's a bad idea. And so we have this history of doing things, some of which work and some of which don't. And we really have to get a lot more into demonstrating to our members that the 400 quid a year they pay us is 400 quid well invested. But then everyone else who's been talking today has to demonstrate that the money you put into this or the time you invest in this is a good investment of time. The cost-benefit analysis is good, both for you or for others. And that's always been our problem. So you can help this through joining your local partnerships, whether they be ABCP or other partnerships, and by contributing at the regional and national levels. And if you want to find out more, the plug is the annual ABC conference is in Coventry on the 24th of May. And like this conference, we'll say that Lord Henley will come, and of course he won't turn up at the last minute. And also Mr. Broadhurst will come, who will not turn up at the last minute as well, I expect, for us. If you want to find out about it, go to businesscrime.org.uk, and there's a link on that page to events. And if you want to discuss any of the things we've spoken about today, you know, or just chat about it, or how we can do things, then by all means contact me on the Business Crime link with my name. So thank you for your attention, and thank you for staying.